Well, we've just seen the Chancellor's autumn statement, which made some pretty clear statements about defence, but also left quite a lot for further review. I think the big headline is what was not contained. There was no mention of the 3% of GDP target set by Liz Truss. Indeed, there was no mention either of the aspiration which Boris Johnson had at the end of his premiership to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence. Rather, there was a reaffirmation of the NATO 2% target, which the UK has been committed to ever since NATO set that many years ago. And if you actually look at the detailed allocation for defence for the next 2 years, then basically, if you put aside Ukraine spending, then it maintains that cash allocation for defence that was made in the spending review last year. So no change there. What, of course, has changed is that inflation is significantly higher than was anticipated, and defence will have to find the money for increased pay, or indeed for increased procurement costs, any costs arising from the deterioration of sterling's international position. All that will have to be found from existing resources, as they say. I think that's going to be especially hard perhaps on the resource side, where the day-to-day spending, where day-to-day spending is frozen in cash terms over the next 2 years at the level it was 2 years ago. So over a 3-year period, cash spending, resource spending by the MOD isn't going to rise at all, and that's a real terms cut of something getting on for almost 10%, really quite significant. The pay settlement will be key. I think we're looking at a very tight pay settlement for the armed forces next year, again, like the rest of the public sector. If we're not, then the MOD finances, I think, will be even harder to add up. And then I think looking beyond the next 2 years, perhaps the greater uncertainty. And Jeremy Hunt, in his address to the House of Commons, made clear that the long-term prospects for defence spending would depend in significant measure on the integrated review update, which is going to be taken forward with some speed. But that, I think, will be constrained in really quite significantly by some of the other things which Jeremy Hunt said. In particular, after the next 2 years, the Chancellor made clear that the rate of increase in public spending will slow from its current level. So capital spending is going to be frozen in cash terms across the whole of government. And day-to-day spending is only going to grow more slowly than it has been. And given the priority, which was very clear, I think, in his statement, given to health, social care and schools, which did get extra money in this review, unless that priority is reversed, it's going to be pretty hard for defence and indeed other international and security departments to get big increases. The one saving grace, I think, for defence is that commitment to continue to spend 2% of GDP on defence means, I think, that defence will get real terms growth after the next 2 years of whatever the economy is growing at, which is still reasonable to assume the economy in the long term will be growing by 1 or 1.5% each year. And that's, I think, the sort of planning assumption the MOD will probably be making over this period. But watch this space. I think a lot more will come out as we enter the integrated review and we have the debates about that. The final point, perhaps, I would make is that one of the big lessons from the Ukraine war for British defence priorities is that we've grossly underinvested in sustainability, in the stockpiles we need to fight high-intensity warfare, and that's a really high priority, I think, for the integrated review. And that inevitably, I think, means, given that the budget's not going to increase very much in total, that there are going to be some really hard choices that have to be made in order to invest in sustainability, which I think everybody agrees we need to do.